Welcome back to the channel. In many cultures around the world, people have wondered what happens after we take our final breath. Do we simply fade away, or does something continue on? Today, we step into a perspective shaped by Buddhist thought, a view that does not focus on a fixed soul, but on a continuous stream of consciousness shaped by our experiences, decisions, and intentions. Welcome back. In this episode, we explore a concept that is often misunderstood: the Buddhist idea of rebirth. It is not the same as the image of a permanent self, traveling life after life unchanged. Instead, Buddhism speaks of something more subtle, more fluid. Rather than a soul, it describes a flow of awareness, something like a flame being passed from one candle to another. The flame continues, but it is never exactly the same as before. According to Buddhism, there is no eternal, unchanging identity. The self we believe we are is made of many shifting parts, thoughts, habits, emotions, memories, and desires. These elements are constantly changing, moment to moment, and it is these patterns, not a solid personality, that continue onward. In other words, what travels between lives is not a person, but a process. This process is influenced by karma, which in Buddhism refers to actions and their mental and emotional imprints. Each choice we make leaves a trace, shaping how the mind grows and moves. When one life ends, this momentum does not disappear. It carries forward, setting the conditions for a new beginning. So, rather than imagining someone being reborn exactly as they were, Buddhism invites us to see continuity without sameness. A river flows from one place to another, yet the water in it is always changing. The river is recognizable, but never still. This understanding shifts the question. Instead of asking, "Who was I before?" Buddhism encourages us to ask, "What am I cultivating now?" Because the patterns we create in this life, our kindness, our fears, our habits, our intentions, shape what comes next. In our upcoming sections, we will explore real cases of children who speak of past experiences they could not have learned in ordinary ways, and how researchers have tried to understand these memories. But first, we needed to understand the Buddhist foundation behind the idea of continuity itself. One of the most central teachings in Buddhism is the idea that there is no permanent, unchanging self. At first, this may seem confusing, because we are used to thinking of ourselves as a single, solid identity, someone with a name, a personality, memories, and preferences. But Buddhism suggests that all of these things are not fixed. They are constantly shifting, shaped by countless conditions coming together. To understand this, imagine a candle flame. When you look at it, it appears continuous, stable, and singular. But in reality, the flame is changing every moment. It is constantly fed by wax and oxygen. Remove either one, and the flame disappears. In the same way, the sense of I depends on thoughts, emotions, sensations, and memories arising and fading, moment after moment. From this perspective, the self is not a single object, but a process. This process can be broken down into what Buddhism calls the 5 aggregate: form, the physical body; feeling, sensations, and emotional tones; perception, how we recognize and interpret experiences; mental formations, habits, reactions, intentions; consciousness, awareness itself. These 5 elements interact to create what we think of as a person, but none of them stay the same from one moment to the next. They shift constantly, just like waves forming and dissolving on the surface of the sea. Because the self is not fixed, rebirth in Buddhism is not the movement of a soul from one life to the next. There is no enduring passenger traveling through time. Instead, what continues is the momentum of these patterns, shaped by choices, emotions, and intentions. The next life is simply the ongoing unfolding of this stream of conditions. This is why the teachings emphasize awareness. If we understand that the self is fluid, we also understand that it can change. Our actions and thoughts are not locked into a predetermined identity. What we nurture grows. What we release fades. The self is something we shape every moment. So, when we speak about rebirth here, we are not speaking about returning as the same person in a new form. We are speaking about the continuation of a living process, subtle, dynamic, and influenced by everything we carry within. When trying to understand how something can continue without a permanent self, We can use a simple yet powerful image, one candle lighting another. When the first candle touches the wick of the second, a flame appears. The flame clearly comes from the first candle, but it is not exactly the same flame. It is a continuation, not a duplicate. Something has been passed on, yet nothing solid has traveled. This is how Buddhism describes the continuation of consciousness across life and death. There is no unchanging soul being carried like an object. Instead, there is a flow of energy and mental patterns, thoughts, emotions, habits, intentions moving forward, shaped by everything that came before. It is continuity without identity. In everyday life, we experience this even within a single day. The version of you in the morning and the version of you before sleep are not identical. Your mood, your thoughts, your memories shift constantly. Yet, you still recognize a thread of continuity because the events of the morning influence the evening. One moment lights the next, the way one candle lights another. This understanding helps explain rebirth in a way that avoids the idea of a fixed soul traveling between bodies. The flame does not jump. The flame does not carry a personal name or personality with it. What continues is the pattern shaped by past causes our actions, fears, joys, and intentions. These shape the conditions of the next unfolding of awareness. This also means that who we become is not predetermined. Because the self is not fixed, everything is open to change. Our reactions, our mindset, the way we treat others, all of these shape the flame that will pass forward. The process is ongoing, moment to moment, life to life. So instead of rebirth being a return of the same person, Buddhism describes it as the unfolding of a process that has been developing through countless experiences. A river flows and changes constantly, yet we still call it the same river. A flame lights another, yet no flame is truly the same from one moment to the next. Understanding this imagery helps us step closer to the heart of Buddhist thought. We are not trapped inside a fixed identity. We are always in motion, always becoming. In Buddhism, the force that shapes this continuation of consciousness is known as karma. In everyday conversation, karma is often described as a kind of cosmic reward and punishment system. But in Buddhist thought, karma simply means action, and more specifically, the intentions behind our actions. Every thought, every choice, every reaction leaves an imprint on the mind, shaping how it moves and develops. Think of karma as momentum. Just as a rolling ball continues to move in the direction it was pushed, the patterns of our thoughts and actions continue to influence our future states of mind. When one life ends, this momentum does not stop. It carries forward into what comes next. The continuation is not random. It is guided by the emotional and mental habits we have cultivated. For example, if someone lives with kindness, patience, and understanding, these qualities strengthen over time. They become more natural, more automatic. When consciousness continues, these qualities act like seeds planted in fertile soil. They influence the conditions of the next unfolding of life. The same is true for anger, fear, or resentment. These, too, leave strong marks, shaping how the mind responds to new situations. Importantly, karma is not fate. It is not a fixed sentence. Because the self is not permanent, patterns can change. A person can transform their reactions, soften their habits, and reshape their inner world at any moment. Karma is dynamic, not locked. It is a process we participate in every day. This view also reframes the idea of responsibility. Instead of focusing on judgment, Buddhism encourages awareness. Every moment is a point where momentum can shift. Every small act of patience or generosity strengthens a new direction for the mind. In this way, karma becomes less about what we deserve and more about what we are creating and reinforcing. So, when Buddhism speaks of rebirth, it is not claiming that a person's identity transfers from one life to the next. What continues is the effect of their actions, the emotional tone of their choices, and the habits of their mind. The flame continues to burn, shaped by the fuel that fed it before. Understanding karma allows us to see continuity not as destiny, but as something we actively shape moment by moment. One of the most intriguing areas connected to the idea of rebirth is the reports of young children who speak of experiences that do not belong to their current lives. These accounts appear across cultures, languages, and regions, and they share a remarkably similar pattern. Most of the children who describe memories of another life begin doing so very early, often between the ages of 2 and 6. At this age, the mind is still forming its sense of identity, and memories are not yet deeply organized. It is a period when imagination is active, but it is also a time when emotional impressions are strong and unfiltered. What stands out in many of these cases is the level of detail. Some children recall places they have never visited, names of people they have never met, or events that occurred long before they were born. They may describe daily routines, relationships, or even personal artifacts from a life they claim to remember. These recollections often appear spontaneously without prompting or encouragement from adults. Another notable aspect is emotional intensity. Many children who speak about past life memories seem to carry strong feelings associated with those memories. A child might show a deep fear of water and later describe a memory of drowning. Another might cry upon hearing a certain type of music, claiming it reminds them of a past family. These emotional reactions often appear genuine and difficult to explain through simple imagination. Researchers who study these cases note that the memories tend to fade as the child grows older. By the time the child reaches 7 or 8, the clarity of the recollections often weakens. Everyday life gradually takes over, and the memories dissolve like mist in sunlight. This aligns with the Buddhist view that identity forms gradually new, experiences shape the mind, and earlier patterns recede. While these cases do not prove rebirth, they raise thoughtful questions. They suggest that memory might not be limited to the brain alone, and that emotional patterns can carry a depth that is hard to explain solely through personal experience. These stories invite curiosity not to confirm or deny, but to look more closely at the hidden layers of consciousness and how it unfolds. Among the most well-known attempts to systematically study past life memories is the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist and researcher from the University of Virginia. Over the course of several decades, he investigated more than 2,500 cases of children around the world who claimed to remember lives that were not their own. His approach was careful and methodical. Instead of treating these stories as belief or imagination, he approached them the way a researcher would document any unusual but recurring phenomenon with interviews, comparison of details, and verification where possible. Stevenson often traveled to the locations the children described. In many cases, the children gave names of people, towns, or family relationships. Sometimes they described how they believed they had died. Stevenson would interview families from both the child's current life and the life that was being described, searching for connections or discrepancies. In some cases, he found strong matches, names that were correct, places that physically existed but were unknown to the child's current family, and events that aligned with recorded deaths. One of the most striking aspects of his research involved birthmarks and physical features. Stevenson documented cases in which a child had a birthmark or bodily difference that corresponded to an injury or cause of death described in the earlier life. For example, a child who remembered being harmed by a wound to the chest might be born with a mark in the same location. Stevenson compiled photographs, medical records, and witness statements to examine these correlations. It is important to note that Stevenson did not claim to have proven reincarnation. Instead, he presented the evidence and suggested that the most consistent explanation for many of these cases was some form of continuity of consciousness. His work was met with curiosity, skepticism, and debate. Some researchers found his documentation compelling, while others argued that cultural influence or suggestion might play a role. Yet, even among critics, his attention to detail and cautious wording were respected. Stevenson's research does not provide final answers, but it broadens the conversation. It opens a space where memory, identity, and consciousness are not limited to what we can physically observe. It invites us to consider that the mind may extend further than we currently understand, carrying traces of experience across boundaries we once thought were absolute. One of the recurring patterns in these reported cases is the presence of strong emotional responses connected to how the previous life is described to have ended. Many children who speak about past life memories seem to carry fears or anxieties that do not match their current experiences or environment. These feelings often emerge long before the child has the language to fully explain them. For example, a child who claims to remember drowning may show intense fear of bathtubs, swimming pools, or even rainwater. Another child might be terrified of loud banging noises and later describe a memory of being injured by gunfire or machinery. These reactions can appear involuntary and disproportionate when viewed only through the lens of the child's current life. Parents in these cases often report being confused at first, unsure how to understand the child's fear. The reaction may seem too strong to be explained by ordinary childhood imagination or a single frightening event. When the child later begins to describe memories, the emotional connection between the fear and the story becomes clearer. Researchers note that the emotional tone is often more compelling than the factual descriptions themselves. A child might not remember every detail accurately, but the feelings associated with the memory can be vivid and intense. This is consistent with what we know about memory in general. Emotional memories tend to be stored more deeply and retrieved more easily than neutral ones. In some cases, these fears begin to fade naturally as the child grows older. As the child forms a new identity in the present life, the emotional weight of the past seems to loosen. However, there are also instances where the fear persists and influences behavior into adolescence or adulthood. In such situations, understanding the emotional link, whether symbolic, psychological, or something deeper, can help guide healing. These patterns raise an interesting question. Why would emotional memory outlast conscious memory? In many areas of psychology, emotional imprints are known to be powerful and long-lasting. Even when we forget an event intellectually, the body may still remember through instinct, tension, or reaction. Whether these children's memories reflect a past life or a different form of deep emotional imprint, the consistency of the pattern invites continued curiosity. Another pattern that appears in many of these cases is the presence of physical marks that align with the way the child claims their previous life ended. These can take the form of birthmarks, areas of missing skin pigmentation, or even structural differences in bone or tissue. While birthmarks are common in general, what stands out here is the specificity, their location, shape, and sometimes even their resemblance to documented injuries. In some of the cases documented by Stevenson and others, a child who recalled being harmed by a wound to the chest might be born with a birthmark in that exact position. Another, who described a life ending due to a head injury, might have a physical indentation or an irregularity in the scalp or skull. In a few rare cases, these marks appeared in 2 or 3 places on the body, matching the number and placement of injuries described in the account. Researchers approached these examples with caution. They compared medical records, death certificates, and family testimonies from the previous life with the physical features of the child in the present. When such records existed and matched the child's description, the connection became more difficult to explain purely through imagination or coincidence. Still, researchers emphasize that correlation is not proof. It is simply an observation that invites questions. There are also cases where the child's emotional or physical sensitivity corresponds to these marks. For example, a child may experience pain, discomfort, or heightened sensitivity in a specific area of the body without any medical explanation. When asked why, the child might describe a memory of being injured in that same spot. This suggests that the connection is not only physical but also deeply internal and emotionally rooted. The existence of these physical marks does not prove the continuation of consciousness. However, they introduce an element of continuity that challenges the idea that identity is confined to a single lifetime. Whether interpreted through spiritual, psychological, or symbolic frameworks, these marks serve as reminders that the body and mind may hold memories in ways we do not fully understand. Rather than serving as definitive evidence, these cases open a quiet, thoughtful space. They encourage us to consider the possibility that experience may leave traces deeper than memory alone, and that the story of a life may extend further than its beginning and end. When discussing these cases, it is important to recognize that science has not reached a final conclusion. The study of consciousness remains one of the most complex areas of research. We understand how the brain processes information, stores memories, and responds to the environment. But the origin of awareness, the sense of being, is still not fully explained. Because of this, questions about continuity beyond one lifetime remain open. Some researchers argue that the memories children describe could come from suggestion, cultural stories, or the natural creativity of the developing mind. Children are imaginative, and their sense of reality is still forming. In many cultures where rebirth is a common belief, children may absorb stories and express them as if they were personal memories. This is a reasonable explanation in some cases. However, there are other cases where cultural influence does not seem to apply, cases where the child and family come from a background that does not believe in rebirth, or where the memories contain specific historical details that would be difficult for a young child to learn accidentally. These accounts do not fit neatly into the explanation of imagination alone. On the other hand, science also cannot claim these memories are proof of past lives. Memories can be altered, emotions can shape perception, and even genuine experiences can be interpreted in different ways. Researchers must be careful not to jump to conclusions simply because something is unusual. The value of scientific inquiry lies in its patience, its willingness to observe without forcing an answer too soon. So for now, the topic rests in a middle ground, neither confirmed nor dismissed. It exists in the space where experience meets mystery. This does not reduce its importance. In fact, it highlights that human consciousness is more expansive and less defined than we once assumed. Rather than trying to resolve the question quickly, many researchers suggest that we pay attention to the patterns, ask meaningful questions, and stay open to what further study might reveal. The unknown is not something to fear, it is simply the edge of what we understand today. In the Buddhist view, the question of past lives is not meant to encourage curiosity about who we might have been before. Instead, it invites us to look closely at how we are living right now. If the self is not fixed, and if consciousness is shaped by patterns of thought and intention, then every moment becomes an opportunity to guide the direction of our own becoming. This perspective shifts the focus from identity to responsibility. Rather than asking, "What did I do in another life?" Buddhism asks, "What am I choosing in this one?" The habits we repeat every day, whether they are habits of kindness, impatience, fear, or generosity, become the momentum that shapes our future experiences. Not only in possible future lives, but even in the next hour, the next day, the next year. Continuity is happening all the time. In this way, the teaching becomes deeply practical. If someone wishes to reduce suffering, they can begin by observing the thoughts and patterns that fuel it. If someone wants peace, they can nurture stillness and compassion in small moments. The path is not grand or dramatic, it is quiet, steady, and cumulative. The idea that everything is changing can be unsettling at first, because we may wish for something permanent to hold on to. But it can also be freeing. If nothing is fixed, then transformation is always possible. Even deeply rooted fears, habits, or emotional patterns can soften and shift over time. A person is never locked inside who they have been. So the stories of children who speak of other lives are not just curiosities. They serve as reminders of how powerful the mind can be. They invite us to consider that our experiences, joyful or painful, leave traces that continue. The real question becomes, what traces do we want to leave? Buddhism suggests that instead of searching backward, we learn to be attentive in the present, the way we speak, the intentions behind our actions, the patience we offer ourselves and others. These everyday moments shape the flame that will pass onward. Whether or not one believes in rebirth, this teaching points to something universal. We are always becoming, shaped by what we nurture inside us. As we reach the end of our exploration, we find ourselves not with a final answer, but with a deeper question. The idea of rebirth in Buddhism does not ask us to prove or disprove past lives. Instead, it encourages us to notice the movement of the mind, the patterns that shape who we are, and how these patterns continue forward. The stories of children recalling memories they should not know, the emotional traces that seem to remain, and the research that carefully documents these cases, all of it reminds us that consciousness may reach further than we currently understand. But the heart of the teaching is simple. The life we are living now is the one we can shape. Every thought, every intention, every moment of awareness becomes part of the momentum that guides the next step. Whether we view rebirth as a literal continuation or as a metaphor for how experience unfolds, the message remains the same. What we cultivate within us matters. So, as we close today's journey, let us carry a quiet reminder with us. Transformation is always possible, and the present moment is where it begins. Thank you for joining me. If this conversation gave you something to reflect on, feel free to stay for the next story. Until then, take care and see you again soon.